I'm looking at your record, and I'm seeing several times when you've been absent on Monday and or on Friday. I've seen, three tardies here in the last 2 weeks. That doesn't show a commitment to the job that we would expect of someone in your position. And whenever someone gets to that point, I always call them in and talk to them and try to find out and try to get to the bottom of the problem, because you can't go on this way.
Well, I feel that I'm a good employee.
You have been a wonderful employee and have had a very acceptable record up to this point in time. But you're at the point where your record is becoming unacceptable. You're at the point where you will be receiving your first discipline for attendance. This is after being an employee, a very good employee for 4 years here.
Another empty chair, and this young lady just might lose her job. Why, you ask? Well, because of too much tardiness, too much sick time, and too much alcohol. As an employer, creating and maintaining an efficient workforce is paramount to staying in business. Unfortunately, however, there are businesses all around the country that are losing their business because of tardiness, because of sick time, firings, all because of drug and alcohol abuse in the workplace and among employees. And the problem is getting worse. So what do you, as an employer, do to combat this problem? What do you do if you see a troubled employee, or where do you refer them? Well, that's what this program is all about. Questions and answers on how you, the employer, can create and maintain a drug-free and alcohol-free work environment.
My addiction had progressed to a point where I had to use any means I could to get money to use my drugs. So that was happening from taking parts out of the place I worked, and it was happening from taking money from the business I owned, and it was happening from taking money from the family that I had.
It affected me on the job, where there were many times I would miss a Friday because at that particular time I was on nights and we got paid Thursday night. And I would party all weekend and usually have a hangover or just burnt out by Monday. And so it affected my attendance at work. It also affected my quality. A lot of times I would hurry up and do a job, not really paying too much attention of how it was done, but just to do it to get myself time to break away and maybe smoke or drink.
One night, I was woken by the alarm to go out on a run. And in the process of that run, I almost had an accident. I've never almost had an accident before. I was always a very safe and conscientious driver. But this particular night, I remember it very well because I fell asleep behind the wheel. And I realized that I fell asleep behind the wheel because I was coming off a 4-day high. I had been getting high every day for 4 days. And I thought that I could stop for this one day to go back to work and function normally.
Drug use, be it alcohol, illegal drugs, or prescription medication, has reached epidemic proportions in our society and is costing us in productivity, increased prices of products, loss of jobs to foreign markets. It's costing us in our tax dollars, going to increased legal prosecution and incarceration of criminals. It costs us in terms of loss of loved ones or friends, either to their own chemical dependency or the chemical dependency of someone else. Faced with these major problems with drug and alcohol, it is imperative that each and every one of us do what we can to begin tackling this problem and changing attitudes about chemical use.
Before we can talk about treatment and before we can talk about drug abuse, we have to define what the word addiction means.
Chemical dependency is the continued use of a substance despite adverse effects financially, to one's health, socially, and legally. Sometimes those consequences are very clearly linked, such as in health issues. If someone has cirrhosis of the liver, other liver kinds of problems, we definitely connect that with use of alcohol. However, many of the health issues are very subtle. Things like increased blood pressure, heart problems, cancer of the esophagus and the throat, the mouth, are very often connected with alcohol use. The same thing is true with various drugs that people use. Sometimes we see financial devastation from chemical use, more so with illegal drugs than we do with alcohol. But sometimes it's hidden. Perhaps the person on the outside looks like financially they're doing okay while they're using up all their savings for their chemical. Perhaps they're letting a bill go here and there because of the chemical use, because they're spending it on the drug. With legal issues, we find that not only do we have direct arrests for drug and alcohol kinds of offenses, but very often things like theft charges. People are stealing in order to get their drug. We may see a series of arrests for things like malicious destruction of property or assault kind of behavior that basically that person was using a chemical at the time that they committed the offense.
A federal study shows that over $30 billion a year is lost in productivity, healthcare costs, theft, and injuries due to drug use, with an additional $30 billion in costs to the community. In 1981, a congressional report from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism shows that $19 billion is lost in productivity and $12.75 billion is lost in health and medical costs due to alcoholism. A Department of Health and Human Services study shows that health care costs for a family with an alcoholic member averages $134 per month prior to treatment. 5 years after treatment, the average is $23 per month. It is estimated that 10 to 23% of all employees use drugs and alcohol on the job. Alcoholics are hospitalized 5 times more than non-alcoholics for alcoholic-related health problems without being treated for the underlying problem. The study goes on to reveal some additional work-related facts. For example, the recreational user is late for work 3 times more than the average employee. He suffers 3.6 times more injuries, 5 times more off-work accidents, which causes absenteeism, files 5 times more workers' compensation claims, and is 1/3 less productive overall. 60% of the world production of illegal drugs is consumed in the United States. Over 1 million doses of prescription drugs are stolen annually. 60% of drug-related emergency room visits and 70% of all drug-related deaths involve prescription drugs.
Let's say you suspect one of your employees of being alcohol dependent or drug dependent. What are some of the warning signs to look for?
The main thing is major changes in behavior, attitude changes, changes in performance. When you have an employee who's always been a good employee, what you consider to be a good employee, and major changes take place, that's a red flag. That's something to be real cautious of. Why is performance changing? Let's find out.
A typical pattern of an employee who is having a chemical dependency problem will be increased absenteeism, particularly on Mondays and Fridays, also day after payday. We see increase in accidents, increase in illnesses, and use of medical benefits. Very often financial difficulty. The individual may be asking coworkers to borrow money to get through to payday if perhaps they've used their money for drugs.
Again, look for major changes in behavior. Look for increased absences, especially on Monday and Friday or after payday. Watch for increased accidents on the job. Look for increased illnesses and calling in sick. Also, medical benefit usage may increase, and the employee may begin to start borrowing money from other employees.
How should an employer confront an employee suspected of being alcohol or drug dependent? Well, let's listen.
Thank you for coming in today, Jane. I called you in because I'd like to discuss your attendance record. I've just reviewed the record after the end of the last pay period, and I'm pretty disturbed with what I see here. You've been an employee with us for almost 4 years now, and you've had a very good record, both on the performance end and on the attendance end. But in the last 3.5 months, there seems to be a drastic deterioration in your attendance record. And so I wanted you to come in so we could discuss what the problem was and to try to get to the bottom of it. Now, I realize that you're reluctant to discuss this, but you do have to make some necessary changes here in order to continue your employment with us. You're at the point you have 5.5 points in violation of our attendance policy. Even one more tardy is going to bring you to 6 points and to the point of discipline. And after five of those times, 5 disciplinary actions, then you're at the point of dismissal. Now, I didn't want to bring you in at the 5th step. I wanted to talk to you at this step before it goes any further, because I think that there's a problem here.
Know your employees. Watch for the subtle signs and symptoms. Document changes that are occurring. If that person should be disciplined, do not back off from discipline. Hold them accountable. When you meet with that employee, you need to focus on their work performance, and you need to let them know what you want to change, what improvement you expect to see. At the same time, you can let that individual know that you are concerned about them, and that if indeed they are having any personal problems that they may need help with, that there are avenues available to them.
Let's say you're a supervisor and you suspect one of your workers is having a drug or alcohol problem. What's the first step you should take?
The number one thing I would suggest is that the supervisor, as a supervisor, you don't try and handle it by yourself. Without having any experience in the treatment or in the assessment of chemical dependency, it would be important for you to be involved in the process of getting this employee some help. But the main thing is to have some other professional person, a counselor, an interventionist, or an employee assistance representative who's trained for intervention to be in there with you. You can lay out the facts, and that's a very powerful tool. When an employee comes in and sees his boss there, his supervisor, and also a counselor or even a member of the family, bringing in a member of the family who says, "This is what I see, these are the facts, your performance has gone down, I noticed that you're missing work quite a bit, particularly after the weekends," those kinds of things. What can we do about it? What's going on?
Be firm, be direct, yet be understanding as well.
It's been a day here, a day there, usually connected with a weekend. You've had 3 tardies on the record in the last 3 months. You have an unexcused absence on the record. Now, these things demonstrate to me that there definitely is a problem. At least you have a problem with us if this continues. And I'm going to urge you again to contact the employee assistance counselor to try to find out why this has occurred and to try to find ways to cope so that you can come back and reestablish your good record with us.
Okay, I said I'd try to do better. I don't think all this stuff is, I don't think this is necessary. I'll do better if that's what you say I need to do. Fine.
Fortunately for Jane, she is being given a second chance. Her employer is asking her to seek counseling. So what is counseling really all about?
Okay, there are several options for someone who's seeking help, and one of those is to come to a center like this for treatment. Treatment entails helping someone who has a problem with drugs or alcohol dependence to come to an understanding of what their condition is and what options they have for treating that condition for themselves. It's a very confidential kind of program. It's no one needs to know about it. Sometimes the employer knows, sometimes the employer doesn't, depending on the condition that the patient is in or if they were sent here by their employers. But it is very confidential, and a person can come into a treatment center like this without anyone on the outside knowing, just for their own safety.
Whatever we discuss here is kept completely confidential. No one else knows the nature of the problem that we talk about, and my records are kept in a very confidential manner.
Okay, when you say confidential, none of this goes in my file.
That's correct. Nothing goes to your,
Okay.
your personnel file. The records are maintained here in locked files and are coded by a code number. So even if by some accident someone came across a file, they would not know that it was you
Okay.
that is being discussed in the file.
Both the employee and the employer benefit from this kind of counseling.
So I think an employer can expect increased productivity, probably less problems with absenteeism and those sorts of things. Also, I think the employer should be able to expect an employee to be more communicative when they return to work, to be able to bring problems to supervisors, employee assistance representatives, or whoever happens to be available in that setting so that they can resolve problems instead of having them accumulate.
Now here's a good question. Why not just fire the employee instead of treating him?
One of the benefits up front to treatment as opposed to firing is that rather than just treating the symptom, they're able to get to the root of the problem. If you have employees whose performance is going down, costs are rising because of absenteeism or grievances or accidents on the job, then just getting rid of those people means that other people coming in quite possibly will have the same types of problems, the people that they get to replace them. And they continue to treat the symptoms, then you have high costs in terms of turnover, constantly training new people, that sort of thing. If there's treatment available, if they have some kind of system set up where the employee knows, hey, they care about me, they want me to do something for me to get help, the employee returns with much higher morale, which means productivity goes up. The employee can get some help for themselves, and the healthier they get, the better employee they become, because absenteeism doesn't occur, and they're more producers. They produce much better on the job. So the benefit of having treatment as opposed to just discipline and termination is higher morale, better employees, higher productivity, better health for your employees, which means long-term employees.
Now let's say that your company would like to start an employees assistance program. Where do you begin?
Well, I would say, first of all, that it's real important for that employer to do some research as to the type of employees that they have, what are the major problems they have in terms of financial losses, grievances, injuries on the job, those kinds of things. It would be important to spend a period of time studying who exactly they're dealing with and what problems they have. From that point, making a needs assessment, what kind of treatment options might we need for these employees, what can we do to help, making those assessments and moving on from there.
Many organizations feel that they're too small or it's too cost prohibitive to provide any kind of help for their employees. I found that in a number of organizations, and I would consider organizations of 500 to 1,000 employees being a medium employer and anything under 500 as being a small employer, that there are creative ways that employers can find to tap into resources and get help for employees who are having problems. Some of them, of course, are hiring your own employee assistance person, and for very small organizations that may not be feasible. There are consortium services that are available.
Now here's a big question. Why even be concerned about your employee's drug or alcohol problem? Why not just ignore it? Why get involved?
Some of the things that can happen is that they do have high costs in terms of turnover. They have employees with lowered morale who are quite possibly, there's a high percentage of folks who use chemicals who are addicted who use on the job, which means there's more accidents, there's more, any kind of thing that costs the company in terms of dollars just spent with no return happens when you don't have some kind of program addressing chemical dependency. You have employees who don't feel like management cares about them, that they're just out to get the buck and to heck with the employees, which means morale goes down, which means they're not going to really be putting out an extra effort for that employer.
One of the risks that small organizations run in choosing not to provide assistance to employees, to not deal with chemical dependency, to not do things like pre-employment alcohol and drug testing, is that as larger organizations are doing these things, those small organizations become the dumping ground for those people with chemical dependency problems.
Now, what about the biggest question of all, drug testing? Is this a viable option for employers?
There was a time within the past few years when they were not able to do that. More and more corporations and even small businesses are having employees, as they come in, sign waivers stating that, yes, you can do drug testing on me randomly, arbitrarily, and that can be done. I think that it can be frightening for employees and even for employers who don't want to single out anybody. There tends to be a taboo against that. You can accuse someone of having alcoholism. You can't accuse somebody of having cancer. Both are diseases, and yet there's this taboo that goes along with it. When an employee is tested, there's getting through that initial conflict of having it come back positive is real important. It's real important for the employer to have some kind of help in meeting with this employee to resolve the problem, to get through the tough part of saying, hey, your drug test came back positive, what do we do?
An employee who has been troubled by drug and alcohol abuse and who successfully undergoes treatment is still a viable resource for your company. A full recovery is always possible, providing the employer responds positively. Now remember our friend? Well, she was able to return to her job only because her employer responded positively to her particular problem. Now that's how the beginning of a drug-free and alcohol-free working environment begins.